Hello, everyone, and welcome to the January 2018 Spark session. That's right, it's a whole new year, whole new lineup of awesome people to give us information we may not have really thought about. And today I'm so pleased to welcome Tracy Kimball Smith to the webinar to talk about print communications in a digital world. This Spark session is going to run a little differently than some of last year's, where it was primarily me interviewing people. Tracy's put together an awesome presentation, so she's going to run through that and then take questions at the end. Speaking of questions, if you want to ask a question, click on the Q&A button. I believe it's on the bottom of your screen, and put your question in that way. If you're on the Zoom webinar, folks on Facebook, just drop them in the comments. Tim will be watching that to text them over to me on my phone. And that's how you get your questions in. Introducing Tracy is always kind of fun. She runs an organization or a company called Clockwise Media Group, and she works with multiple clients. One of her really big clients is the Independence Institute in Colorado, and that's how I first came across Tracy. I've seen her at a lot of events. Her work is awesome. She won a Trendsetter Award last year. Well, they did, but she did. You know, it's kind of how that is. And when she sent over her bio, I loved it. It was one of my favorite bios I've seen in a long time. I'm going to read it to you, so you're going to see me reading. This is what Tracy has to say about herself. Although I do not have an art degree, I do not wear the requisite badge of leftist ideology. I'm a strong believer in limited government, personal responsibility, and free market economics. My goal is to make sure that the viewpoints of the right are presented visually and in an exciting way. Why should the left have all the good art? Good question, Tracy. I love working with like-minded individuals and organizations. With Clockwise Media Group, I get to do work that I love, at the same time spread the message of limited government, and it doesn't get any better than that. In my free time, I enjoy the fabulous outdoors of Colorado. Gardening, running, and road biking take up most of my summer, spring, and fall. And with that, I'm gonna let Tracy get going. So Tracy, take it away.
Great, thanks. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's pretty cool to be here. I'm a fan of these webinars. One correction to the bio that you just read, I do have an art degree. I have a BFA with an emphasis in graphic design. So I've been doing this for a long time, since 1991, and I went freelance right out of college, so I have never actually had a paid vacation. I hear they're nice. Might be nice to have one. So today we're talking about print communication in a digital world. Let's jump right in. I'm going to begin with a story. So in 2012, the scientists at CERN, they had a huge announcement. They had discovered the final missing particle in the standard model of particle physics, the Higgs boson. So they put all their research into a PDF document and released it to the world. Now, this created a frenzy on social media. People all over the world were talking about it. Unfortunately, they weren't talking about the content of the report. Instead, everybody was laughing at the CERN scientists because of the font they used. The scientists at CERN decided to present their scholarly work on particle physics using Comic Sans. Now, this would be a great font to use for a kid's birthday party invitation, but this completely undermined the scientists' message. So here's one of the pages from the report. Now, the font is only one of the problems with this page. It's pretty awful, and this is probably a good reason why scientists and policy wonks should not be allowed to design. But I use this story to illustrate the point that whether it's print or digital communication, that good design really matters. You might have the greatest content in the world, but if it's designed poorly, it's not going to have the impact that you want. The CERN folks, they learned this lesson the hard way. However, in their defense, a couple years later, they had some fun with this, and they, on April 1st, they released a statement saying that they were switching to Comic Sans as their corporate font. So they had a bit of a sense of humor about it, and this is a good lesson in actually turning a failure into a success. So what is print design? Well, it's all of the things that you see here. It's brochures, it's newsletters, but it can also be a t-shirt, it can be a mug, it can be a coaster. So with the advent of all things digital, I think a lot of people assume that print design is on its way out and it's going to be completely replaced by digital. So is this true? Well, is print dead? The first question I would ask you is, have you noticed a decrease in postcards, in catalogs, and the junk that piles up in your mailbox every day? And I have not, and I'm pretty sure that everybody else is not seeing a decrease in that. So there's my first piece of anecdotal evidence. But the Wall Street Journal recently sent out this article, and thank you to Shana Davidson for bringing this to my attention. She sent it out in her email newsletter, and it was perfect timing because it fits right into this presentation. But the article noted that annual spending on newspaper circulars and coupons and direct mail and catalogs is actually up 85% from 2012. It had a story in the article about Costco, and in 2016, they started sending fewer mailers, and they saw an immediate drop in visits to the store. So they quickly reversed that trend and started sending out those coupons. They're especially important for retail. People make a lot of buying decisions based on the coupons that they get in the mail. So print communications can be very, very effective. Another piece of evidence I have is books versus ebooks. Now, I assumed that ebooks would completely replace paper books. In fact, I can't even remember the last time I bought a paper book. I read everything on my phone or my iPad. I buy all my books electronically, but apparently not everybody is like me. Because in 2016, ebook sales actually declined by almost 19% in the US, while paperback books increased by 7.5%. And I think part of this trend is because people just prefer having a tangible item rather than an electronic file that lives on the cloud. I think this is why we're seeing the return of vinyl records. They're tangible, you can hold them, you can look at the cool cover illustrations, you can show them off to your friends. You can't really show off your digital music collection to your friends, it's not very cool. So we're seeing a resurgence of this. So print design is alive and well, and today I'm going to focus mainly on print communications, but I want to touch on some of the advantages of getting your message out digitally. So obviously with digital, you can reach a very wide audience very quickly and very easily. Anybody who has access to the internet can read your message. You can get things out very inexpensively. You can put up a web page or a blog post very, very quickly, so there's speed involved there. You can track the pages very easily with analytics, so you can see who's looking at what page, how long they're spending there, where they're clicking around, what keywords they're using. You don't necessarily get that feedback with print. You can also use millions of colors on the web. When you use more colors in print, you usually have to pay more money for each color that you use. And it's also really super easy to update something that's digital. You can go in, if there's a typo, you can fix it. If you have a change, you can easily go in and fix it, which if you make a mistake on a printed piece, it's pretty permanent. So it's a little more crucial to proofread on something that's going to print. So I have my top 5 typos that I've made in my long career as a graphic designer. So typo number 5, Swiss cheese became swill cheese. Our goal is your success with success misspelled. And unfortunately, this one actually made it to the press and was printed before we found that error. And number 3 is the same typo that I bet a lot of you working in public policy have made, and it turned into pubic policy, which actually sounds a little more interesting. Number 2, I was working on a class catalog for a local college, and internet courses somehow morphed into inter courses, which was a little embarrassing. And my number 1 typo, and thankfully this was caught before we went to press, asset management became assets management. So whether you are printing traditionally or digitally, you still need to proofread, although much more important for print. So why use print? Digital is the way to go if you need to get something out instantly, if you need to track engagement, or if you're on a limited budget. but print design is really great because it adds instant credibility. If someone hands you a printed business card, we tend to think that they're legit, even if they're really not. You have a lot more control with print. As a designer, it's really frustrating working with digital sometimes because you don't know if the color that you use on that website is going to look the same from monitor to monitor. That web page is going to reflow depending on how wide the monitor is. So and when you look on it on a mobile device, it's going to be completely different. You don't have that control. But when you're working with print, the type stays where you put it, the colors pretty much come out the way you're expecting. So print is also tangible, so it makes more of an impact. People tend to pick up and read something that's mailed to them, whereas we get so many email, it's really easy to hit that delete button. And I think the most important thing about print is it creates reciprocity. I've got a picture here. This is my grandma. We're on the Tivoli trolley in Denver. So many years ago, when she was quite elderly, she made a couple of donations to nonprofit organizations. And this got her onto a mailing list. And all of a sudden, she started getting multiple pieces of mail every day from other very sketchy charities. And many of them would include these little gifts, like a sheet of return address stickers. So my grandma felt obligated to make another donation. And pretty soon the gifts started getting larger, things like calendars and these rubber bracelets. So she felt even more obligated to make donations. And eventually my parents had to intervene because her very limited income was quickly vanishing each month to these charitable organizations. And I have even fallen into the same trap. I sponsor a child, her name's Adam Faye, through World Vision. So I give $30 every month to Adam. But every 3 or 4 months, I get something from World Vision, and it's a little calendar or it's a sticker book. And they ask me, well, wouldn't you love to send this to Adam? Wouldn't that be nice? And of course, they have a form where you can send an additional donation along with your gift. And it's really hard to throw these away. I feel a little guilty, like I'm depriving Adam of these wonderful gifts. So this is the power of print design, and it's one of the reasons why those 8-page development letters really work. So before I talk about how to use print cost effectively, let me define a couple of things. So digital printing is electronic. It's when you hit that print button on your computer and it goes to the printer. It could be your small desktop printer, laser printer, or it could be a large commercial digital printer. So offset printing is a little different. These are the large commercial presses. They require a pressman to set up the printing plates, to apply the different colors of ink, to adjust the registration, and actually run the job. They're very specialized, and you'll only see them in print shops. So on a side note, I actually worked at a print shop in my 20s when I was just starting out in graphic design, and I was in charge of stripping the negatives and lining up the colors and burning them onto the printing plates for the offset presses. And believe it or not, my actual job title was stripper. So I can say that I've worked as a stripper at a print shop. So offset printing is great for large quantities. As the cost per piece it goes down, the more that you print. So with offset, there's a large cost for that initial setup. So it doesn't make sense for small quantities, but if you're doing a large run of something in the thousands, then offset is the way to go. With digital, there's no setup cost, so it's very cost effective to do small quantities. So at the Independence Institute, we just bought a digital printer, and it prints double-sided. It prints on 18 by 22 inch pages, full color. We can fold things on there. We can staple. So we have been able to pull a ton of jobs in-house, and this is saving us a lot of money. So we were able to print our Founders Night, which is our annual fundraising dinner. We printed our invitations in-house. We did all of the signage for the event, the table signage in-house. In conjunction with this event, we had an Earth Day fossil fuels art contest we were able to print almost all of the signage, as long as it wasn't larger than 18 by 22, to accompany that event. We have also pulled almost all of our issue papers in-house. We print those now. And John Caldera sends out his off the record once a month to our larger donors. So just between off the record and issue papers, pulling those in-house has saved us more than $8,000 a year. It's saved a ton of money. We don't have to send that out to the print shop now. We do it all ourselves. It can be a fair amount of work if you do have to stuff envelopes. So you can, if you have interns, it's a great job for interns. So some of the drawbacks to using digital is you don't have as many choices of paper. You're pretty much limited to white. There are some laser papers that are a little more interesting than that, but there's definitely a limitation. You also can't do spot colors or Pantone colors on digital. So if there's a very specific color that you need to match, you probably won't be able to match it on a digital printer. It's harder to do bleeds on a digital because you have to print on an oversized page and then trim it out. And if you're printing hundreds of something, you're probably not going to want to sit there with an X-Acto knife, cutting things out. And the folds are not going to be quite as crisp as when you use heavier weight paper as the ones that you'll see at a print shop. But oftentimes you can print things in-house. You can take those flat sheets to your local print shop and they'll trim them out for you and they can fold and staple. And so you'll still have that cost savings because you're doing the actual printing in-house. So here are a few more fun things that you can do with digital printing. We had an issue paper on our Colorado Taxpayers Bill of Rights that just got out of control. It was, most of our issue paper is about 20 pages, and this was well over 100 pages for this particular issue paper. So we decided to change it into a book. And you can get on to createspace.com and you can upload your files and you can do print on demand. So whenever we need another book, we can order up, one, or you can order up 200. They're about $2 a piece for each book, and they mail them right to you. And it's pretty cool, actually. Another fun thing you could do with digital printing is it makes it really easy to customize things. You can run through a sheet of stickers and you can print out custom labels for a wine bottle for an event. You can do wrappers for candy bars for an event. You could do water bottles. We have bookmarks for our School Choice for Kids website, so we can print these in-house and then take them to a print shop, have them trimmed out and laminated, and then we have these fun little bookmarks to hand out at events as well. So I want to talk about some of the trends that I'm seeing that can be useful for print communications. I'm seeing this resurgence in artisanal products, and it's mostly with millennials. I see them moving away from the large chain stores, and they're seeking out these local handcrafted items. So we're seeing an increase in things like local butcher shops and artisanal cheese stores and craft beers and handmade furniture. And many school districts are returning to teaching cursive handwriting after previously dropping it in favor of keyboarding. And we're also seeing this renewed interest in calligraphy. So how can we capitalize on this trend with print? Well, one of the ways we can do this is using recycled paper. You get that handcrafted feel with the recycled paper. It has some texture and color, it has some flex in there. Although if you are printing digitally, your choices are going to be pretty limited with the paper that's available, the recycled paper that's available for a laser printer. I found one here. It's white, but it has a linen finish, so it's got that texture to it. Another thing you might consider doing is letterpress printing. And this is a really old-fashioned printing method, and it actually uses metal plates to stamp the design into the paper. You can see how the design is stamped in here. It's kind of raised up, and it produces this very tactile and expensive feel to the piece. So if you print on recycled paper with a letterpress, you're going to be appealing actually to old and young. Your older donors are going to love the formality of that engraved invitation, and the millennials are going to love it because it looks artisanal and handcrafted. And yes, letterpress printing is more expensive, but for the right project, it can be worth it. Another way to get that handcrafted look is with the use of calligraphy. And there are people around calligraphers who can actually hand letter an invitation. So you can get them to hand letter it, then you can scan it in and you could print it in-house, or you could take it to an offset press, or you can even do it letterpress. Now, if you don't have the budget to hire a calligrapher, there are many calligraphic fonts available, so you can pull those into Adobe Illustrator and you can customize them and create a similar look. So there's another trend I'm seeing, which interestingly is the complete opposite of artisanal. So it's away from handcrafted and it's more high tech. So there are some really cool technologies that designers are starting to incorporate into print projects. And I'm sure you're looking at this bottle of Bombay gin lighting up here. The designer used electroluminescent ink. So the electric current is conducted from a battery at the bottom of the package there. And when you pick it up, there's a mechanical switch there that's triggered and it causes it to light up. Now, most of us probably aren't going to have the budget for something like this, but I mean, how cool would this be for a project about like sunshine laws for transparency in government, or an Independence Day event? It would be super cool with something like this. The one in the middle here, this Muse album cover, they used thermochromic ink, which changes color with temperature. So when you touch it with your hand, it changes temperature. And I can just see a huge amount of creative ideas coming out of this. You could do things are lighting up an energy policy project. You could do something where a blue state is changed to a red state when you touch it. So this could be very, very cool and fun to work with. The yellow one on the right there uses hydrochromic ink, which changes color when it's exposed to water. So I could envision something like washing away corruption or help us clean up government, something like that using this technology. But the real future of print, it doesn't lie in one or the other. We're not going to see all digital or all print. We're going to see them coming together in unique ways to complement each other. And this 19 Crimes wine is probably the coolest blending of print and digital that I have ever seen. You download an app to your phone, and when you hold it up to the bottle, it uses augmented reality technology, and the characters on the bottle actually come to life and tell you their stories. It's a little bit creepy, but it's actually very, very cool. And how neat would this be to use this technology for the freedom movement to tell stories of folks whose businesses have been crushed by regulations, or stories about kids whose lives have been changed by having access to high quality education. Now, you'll need a pretty large budget for this one, but it's really, really cool. If you get a chance, look it up on YouTube so you can see the actual videos playing.
Wait a minute. You need a large budget unless like 50-something think tanks pool it and have one app that they can all tap into, right?
There you go, yes. So these, the 19 Crimes bottles are very, very cool. I don't know how practical it is, but here's some practical examples of how print and digital can work hand in hand. So we see lots of printed pieces that drive people to landing pages, so that's how they can work together. It's also very common to see printed pieces that drive folks to an online registration form. In Colorado, we have grocery stores called King Soopers. I do most of my grocery shopping there. So I have a loyalty card that I swipe whenever I buy something there. So King Soopers knows exactly what I purchase. Then they mail me these very customized coupons based on what I buy. Some of them are for free items that I usually get, and they are amazingly effective at getting me into the store. So while not quite as high tech, we use a similar technique at the Independence Institute. On our homepage, we have a sign up form where you put in your email address and you check the boxes of the policy the specific policy that you're interested. We then take this information and we create segments in our list based on the policy that people are interested in. So then when we have an event, say for energy policy or education, we can send the invitations directly to the people that we know are interested in those specific areas. So in conclusion, I would say print is absolutely not dead. In fact, there are indications that people are pulling back a bit from technology and returning more to those tangible items. So print can still be utilized very effectively, especially if the piece is well designed and it works in conjunction with digital. And with that, I will turn it back over to Nicole for questions.
Well, thank you so much, Tracy. As always, it's great to get the bird's eye view of what's going on. And it reminds me, actually, if you can unshare, there you go. It reminds me of basically why it is that even though we all think we're creative, working with a true creative is super helpful, because creatives tend to have their eye on what's going on and they're looking around at what the latest trend is, and they see the wine bottle light up and say, okay, how can I use that to further public policy if they're in a policy world? Like, and it's interesting, like some of those things are expensive, but there are so many people in the network who could pool their resources that, you know, things that seem out of reach aren't necessarily out of reach if everybody just has a conversation, right? So, and this is just a reminder, folks, if you have questions, pop them in the comments section on Facebook so that Tim can alert me to them, or put it in the Q&A box. I have a list of questions. It turns out some of these came in advance, Tracy. I just hadn't seen them in my inbox, and Lonnie was kind enough to drop them in. So this first one is from her, I believe. Profiles in Private Education, which is your Trendsetter Award piece that won at print. They were right on. So she wants to know, how did you think that through and decide to go through with this high quality print medium for that project? What made you make that decision?
That project came out of the Education Policy Center at the Independence Institute. So it was very, very collaborative. And I believe they got a grant for that. And Ross Izzard, who sadly is no longer with us, but he's moved on to ACE scholarships, but he was the senior research analyst in education policy. So he did all of the writing, and he's a fantastic writer. He went out and he interviewed the staff and the students and the parents at all of these private schools, and then wrote these wonderfully heartfelt and tearjerker articles, and then they turned it over to me with just creative license to do whatever I want, which was awesome and amazing. And they also had a professional photographer take photos as he was doing the interviews. So all of these wonderful elements came together. We had these beautiful photos, we had these heartfelt, well-written stories, and then creative license to do what we wanted with it. And they turned out really, really well. And I think they made a huge impact because they were tangible, because people could hold them and look at the pictures and flip through. And what they wanted to communicate with this project was that private schools are not just for rich white kids. There are a lot of private schools out there that have scholarships, and they benefit kids that are in lower incomes and minorities or with special needs. And this series addressed that. And I did it very effectively and brought in quite a bit of money and donations. And we didn't even ask for money. People just read these stories and sent money in, which was very cool.
That's probably helpful to some of your school reform efforts that y'all are doing over there, isn't it?
Yes. More money is always good.
Yep. Okay, so how many of those did you print?
It was a pretty small run. I think less than 2,000 for each issue, and we sent them out to specific donors. we made a lot of them available to the schools themselves so that they could push them out through their network. And the schools were very, very grateful and happy to have them. And it's always good to build allies when you're putting together education policy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then the next question I have is about e-publications. And I think they mean like, you know, making the books printable. So practically speaking, how do we do this? And is it feasible for an organization to handle that in-house?
Yes, it does take a little bit of work. Some of it gets tricky. So when you're talking about like print on demand, which isn't really an ebook, but that's a createspace.com. You have a PDF file that you'll upload, and it kind of walks you through the process. If you're doing an EPUB, it's a little more difficult. You have to have a digital file, and I work in InDesign, and it actually has technology in there already that will help you create an EPUB. Probably the hardest thing with an EPUB is getting that index at the very start to actually jump through the publication. And there are just a few things that you learn as you go. Like you can't have, there are a certain number of pages that you have to have at the beginning, and it's kind of limited. There are lots of online resources that can help you with that. It can be a little bit tricky. Once you've done one, it seems really easy, but that first one, there's a little bit of a learning curve. But it's definitely something that you could do in-house, especially if you have access to InDesign and the Adobe Creative Suite.
So organizations that are a little smaller, let's say they've written a 100-page book that they want to do this with, about how much would something like that cost to outsource, do you think? Just setting up the EPUB and getting it through?
If you're supplying a pretty clean, like Word document, for EPUBs, there's not a lot of formatting because you're just dropping text into an e-reader. So it can go pretty quickly. I would say probably about 5 to 10 hours worth of work for a designer to do. And depending on how much your designer charges, typically it's $50 to $100 an hour for a good designer. Okay,
so that's helpful for folks to know, just to put it in it, because sometimes they can handle it in-house, and sometimes you don't have anybody who knows how to use InDesign. I've had a little experience with that too, and trying to go from Word to Amazon isn't fun.
Yeah, believe me, I avoid Word at all costs because I'm a designer and I cannot see a Word.
Formatting. So, and I know they're fussy about borders and stuff. Okay, so the next question I have is, what is your recommendations for evaluating for organizations that contract out for designers? What do you recommend they do? How do they figure out who's good? Because you'll have people come forward from board members, 16-year-old daughter to a design that charges $2,000 an hour. So what do I ask to see? How do I evaluate them? What are your recommendations there?
Well, this is a good question. There's a lot to think about here. You have to have somebody that knows printing. First of all, you have to, if somebody designs the file, sends it to you, you send it off to your printer, and then they have all sorts of problems with it. If they're not working in the right color space, if they're not using graphics that are high resolution, it's going to cause a lot of problems, and you're not going to get a good product back from the printer. So I think you need to make sure that you look at samples that they've produced that have been actually printed on paper. I would make sure that you have a designer that listens to you and gives you what you want, not what they want. A lot of designers have a very specific style, and everything they do looks the same. It fits into that same box. And a good designer is going to listen to the client and decide what they want, what look and feel they want. For instance, the Independence Institute has a very modern look to it. A lot of other think tanks and organizations in the SPN network have more of a traditional feel to them. So the designer has to capture that. And having a style guide for the organization is really helpful in guiding that process.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's interesting. I cut my teeth on web design, and by the way, I'm not a designer. Anybody should hire for design work. When we do design work, we outsource it to real designers. I know how to manipulate things after I get the file, and I can make some basic stuff. But if you're doing a big project, it's pay a real creative.
That's right. I don't do programming. I leave that to you.
Sometimes I'll hire a designer who sends me RGB for print, and I'm like, crap. Because they didn't, and I usually have asked for certain specifications from I call the print shop. I'm like, what does it need to be? So when I have somebody who, when I say something as simple as I need CMYK color, 300 DPI, and I get it, and it's not that, that's usually a sign that they have only done web. And they think they can print from web, and I guess you can, but yeah, I think it saves time, hassle, and money to hire somebody who's done print before to do print, or else you end up with, I had one, the text didn't show up when it printed. It was in the PDF to the printer. It looked fine. I got the proof. It looked fine. It went on the offset print press, and like one little block of text in the middle was not properly embedded, and like an advertisement with no ad.
These details are important.
Yeah. And so like little things that you can't necessarily screen for. So having an experienced print person, I think, is really important. Okay. Okay, next one's fun. How do we take our repeat publications like newsletters and things like that we print into the virtual space? I've heard about pages like ISSUU issue, I guess. What do you like? And do you have to keep printing anyway after you do this?
Do you have to keep printing?
Like, so if you
switch completely digital,
like to virtual, do you have to then probably keep printing them?
Well, that's a decision that you need to make on an organizational level. A lot of donors that we tend to have are older, and they love having that tangible newsletter mailed out to them. We get a really good response from our newsletter at the Independence Institute. We get a lot of donations back from that actual tangible newsletter. So I would suggest that you don't stop printing it, but making it available online is a very, very good idea. So there are lots of ways you can do that. You can do it in HTML. You can actually have all of the content and you can recreate it on your website. It takes a lot of work to do it that way. You can have a downloadable PDF document, or you can upload it to the issue website where you can flip through it. And I guess it depends on how much work you want to put into it, but I would definitely do print and some type of digital, whether it's PDF or right on your website.
Yeah, and I always think, like, who am I targeting with the newsletter? Is it the donors who want it printed? Well, then I'm not going to spend 50 hours doing individual articles on a website. Am I more likely to meet people who are consuming it with this? Then I might spend that time on the website too, things like that. Okay, this is the last question because we're running out of time. And it is there a print project type that this is for you, that you've always wanted to create but have yet to find a client to do it with? Is there something like, I've always wanted to do that, like the light up box or something, but I can't?
Well, I was a horse crazy kid. I grew up loving horses and riding horses and drawing horses and doodling horses. And I never, ever, ever could work horses into my artwork for clients. I'd always try to talk them into it. So finally, a few years ago, I had an opportunity. It was for a classical academy. In fact, my daughter goes to this school, and I did the logo. It's Golden View Classical Academy, and I worked a Roman horse into the logo. So I finally got to do a logo with a horse in it. So there you go. But I would also love to do the a job like that light up Bombay gin bottle. That would be very cool.
Yeah, that looked really cool. It got my attention for sure. I was like, I wonder how much that really costs.
I know.
They probably make a lot of boxes.
True.
So, okay, Tracy. Well, any last words of advice, like 2 things to keep in mind on print media for the digital world before we say goodbye?
My one piece of advice is that good design matters. So don't cut corners. If you're going to spend the money to print something, spend the money to have it professionally designed. If you don't have somebody in-house, then find a good contractor to do that for you, because you will be wasting your money if you spend the money on print and it looks really bad. Nobody's going to read it or pay attention to it.
Oh, that's the best advice you could give somebody. Well, thank you so much for being on. Okay, folks,
Thank you.
We'll see you in a month. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.